Chris.
Thank you for also praying for Dr. Chris.
Merci parce que tu vas faire encore ton ministère d'enseignement ce soir.
So you're going to also minister to us today.
L'honneur et la gloire te reviennent au nom de Jésus. Nous avons.
Honor and glory be given to you in the name of Jesus we pray.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Merci, Maman Janine.
Thank you, Maman
Je vais
Janine.
demander au frère André d'élever sa voix.
Que
le Seigneur nous donne bonne santé à pouvoir bien terminer cette formation en toute beauté. Frère André va élever sa voix.
So
nous remettre dans la main divine, que le Seigneur nous donne la bonne santé aux formateurs ainsi qu'aux participants.
To the trainers and also to the participants have a health.
Seigneur notre Dieu, nous voulons te célébrer pour ta grâce et ta fidélité dans nos vies. Depuis le début de cette formation, tu es en train de nous équiper et de nous révéler des choses, Seigneur. Ce jour encore, nous voulons te confier ces moments que nous allons passer ensemble afin que tu nous donnes une bonne santé jusqu'à la fin de cette formation. Seigneur notre Dieu, nous voulons te confier ton serviteur que tu utilises puissamment. Que tu continues par le fortifier et l'utiliser puissamment dans le nom de Jésus. Je confie chaque participant ici présent. Seigneur, donne-nous la bonne santé physique. Donne-nous la bonne santé spirituelle pour la gloire de ton nom. Merci de continuer à nous équiper pour que nous puissions être des instruments efficaces entre tes mains. Que ton nom soit béni, Seigneur, parce que tu le fais pour la seule gloire de ton nom. Au nom de Jésus, nous avons prié. Amen.
Amen. Merci, André.
Amen. Merci, André. Thank you, André.
Nous allons demander à Papa Edouard d'élever sa voix pour prier qu'il n'y ait pas de délestage, que la connexion soit bonne, le réseau fiable, l'électricité soit au bon point.
We're going to ask Papa Amantou to raise his voice to pray for the electricity. So Amantou going to raise his voice to pray for the electricity so everything can go well without any interruption, without the power off.
Seigneur, nous voulons prier pour ce moment, pour ce temps et ce que cet après-midi pour l'interaction. Nous voulons prier que tout se déroule bien, que l'électricité puisse servir chaque bureau, chaque maison et partout où nous sommes, que nous puissions bien sûr. Pour la technologie. Nous prions, Seigneur Dieu, pour que tous ceux qui sont connectés puissent avoir la connexion nécessaire et que ce moment, nous puissions apprendre à tes pieds. Merci, Père, de diriger toutes choses. Nous confions ce moment d'apprentissage en toi. La connexion soit disponible, que l'électricité soit disponible.
Amen.
Amen. Merci beaucoup, directeur.
Thank you again, our director.
Je vais demander à Papa Abraham de prier pour Dr. Carl.
Pray for Dr. Carl.
Le frère Oumar.
Our brother
Papa
Oumar.
Jack.
And
Ophélie.
And our sister
Que
Ophélie.
le Seigneur les visite,
May God
les
visit
touche.
them. Touch them.
Seigneur notre Dieu, nous te sommes reconnaissants parce que tu es notre Dieu. Ta parole déclare que par tes meurtrissures nous sommes guéris.
Your word says
Nous
that
croyons
by
à la
your stripes we are
puissance de ta
healed.
parole.
We believe the power of your words.
C'est pourquoi cet après-midi, nous voulons porter devant ton trône de grâce
That's why this afternoon we want to bring our brothers before your throne.
tes serviteurs, Seigneur Oumar,
Your
Gasrabe,
servant Umar,
Pascal,
Gasrabe,
Ophélie, Dr.
Ophélie,
Carl.
Dr. Carl.
Nous prions, Seigneur, afin que toi-même qui les as créés, tu puisses
We
leur
pray
faire la
that
grâce de la
the
guérison.
one creating them so they give you grace for to be healed completely.
Seigneur, tu connais là où se trouve le mal et tu as toute la puissance et toute
You
l'autorité pour
can
pouvoir les
see
guérir.
where is the head, and you have the power to heal them.
Merci parce que dans les jours à venir, tu nous donneras de rendre grâce et gloire à ton nom. Parce que dans ton amour infini, tu vas les visiter individuellement et collectivement. Que toute la gloire te revienne au nom de Jésus. Amen.
Amen. Merci beaucoup, Papa Niauré.
Thank you again, Papa.
Alors s'élève un chant. Dieu tout-puissant, oh, que tu es grand, oh, de tout mon être, alors s'élève un chant. Dieu tout-puissant, que tu es grand. Dieu tout-puissant, car mon cœur considère tout l'univers créé par ton pouvoir, le ciel d'azur, oh, les éclairs, le tonnerre, l'éclair matin, oh, les ombres du soir, de tout mon être, allons s'élève un chant. Dieu tout-puissant, Dieu tout-puissant, que tu es grand, de tout mon être, allons s'élève un chant. Dieu tout-puissant, que tu es grand. Merci Seigneur, Dieu tout-puissant, Dieu de gloire.
Thank you, Lord, powerful God, because you are
C'est toi
great.
qui nous as conduits depuis le premier jour
And
jusqu'à
lead
aujourd'hui, le
us
5e
since the
jour.
first
Nous
day
te
unto
disons
the
Hosanna à
fifth
ton
day.
Saint-Nom.
We
Nous
say
remettons la
Hosanna,
séance de
holy
ce
to your
soir
name.
entre tes mains.
We are putting this time in your
Viens nous
hands.
instruire. Parle
Come
au travers de
to
ton
instruct us.
serviteur pour qu'il puisse
Speak
nous
of through your
équiper, Seigneur
servants,
mon Dieu.
so you can
Que tout
equip
ce
us.
que, Seigneur, nous recevons, nous puissions les mettre en
Everything we are
pratique pour
receiving,
ta
let us
seule
put into
gloire.
practice the glory of your name.
Gloire. Au nom de Jésus-Christ,
In
nous
the
avons
name of
prié.
Jesus,
Amen.
we pray. Amen.
Amen. Bonjour. Are we ready to begin? Okay. All right. Well, I mentioned yesterday that we'd talk about the reading a little bit today. So I was wondering if you have the first book that you were sent, the one about the king and the fool. I can't say the title in French. Le roi. What was it? I can't remember exactly the words, but yeah. I'd love to talk about that a little bit and hear your thoughts on it. Just a quick thought on that. That book really, I think the intention of that book is to give you a good understanding of other worldviews, to hear from their perspective, so you have a nice, clear picture of those worldviews and what they hold, because it's crucial in communicating with people of other worldviews that you actually know what they believe, and you don't have a sort of a distorted version of it or a mischaracterized version of it. So I'd love to hear if you guys have some thoughts on the book, whether thoughts, things that you enjoyed, appreciated, things that stood out to you that you learned, or even perhaps things you disagreed with, criticisms. The book's new to me, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Je peux prendre la parole? Oui, bonsoir. Moi, j'ai lu ce livre.
I read this book.
Qui m'a fait vraiment du bien.
What really helped me a lot.
Il faut dire que je cherchais un tel ouvrage pour savoir l'opinion de certaines religions telles que le bouddhisme, l'hindouisme.
I was looking for a book talking about Buddhism, other religions.
Et puis, quand on a fait venir ce livre, que je l'ai découvert,
so when we sent to us this book, I was really happy.
Parce qu'il a fait vraiment une présentation de façon claire de l'essentiel.
Because he introduced everything essentially, but it's good.
De la vision de ces différentes religions.
About the vision of the different religions.
Seulement qu'au niveau de l'athéisme, j'ai l'impression que ça a été vraiment un survol. Je ne sais pas si l'auteur l'a fait sciemment.
So about the atheism, it seemed it go deeper.
Voilà ce que je peux dire. J'ai beaucoup apprécié le livre.
So this is what I can say about the book. I really love the book. Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Anything you learned from it that was helpful?
Oui. J'ai apprécié bien les diverses opinions religieuses qui ont
I really appreciate very well the diverse opinion about the books.
J'ai aimé particulièrement l'aiguille qui sert à couper comme le ciseau.
So specifically, we're talking about the church.
L'aiguille, je n'ai pas dit l'aiguille. L'aiguille qui sert à coudre et non à diviser comme le ciseau.
So it was saying that the book, like the church, should be like an institution for connecting people to one another, not to divide.
Tu dis église ou bien aiguille, c'est deux mots différents. Une aiguille. Ok. Et deuxièmement, c'est l'humilité du musulman à reconnaître les faiblesses de la religion musulmane et l'humilité aussi du juif qui se sont demandé pardon par rapport à l'accident qui est advenu à la fin, et je crois que c'était quelque chose qui m'a marqué. Comment ils étaient prêts à reconnaître qu'ils sont des hommes limités et faibles.
Merci. Okay, thank you.
Moi, c'est surtout certaines cohérences de religion, là où des religions dans leurs principes, se retrouvent dans la moralité. On a vu que plusieurs religions, dans la moralité, ils ont à peu près les mêmes choses, la pureté, la bienfaisance, les bonnes œuvres. Mais ce qui m'a beaucoup façonné, c'est le fait que le roi a été appelé à prendre la décision pour choisir le meilleur de religion, mais qu'il y a eu, après la présentation du christianisme, qu'il a eu une révélation qui lui a convaincu, même si de façon publique ne pouvait pas amener son peuple à choisir le christianisme, mais lui-même était convaincu que son peuple avait besoin du christianisme, jusqu'à ce qu'il a déclaré que le seul qui pouvait mériter la médaille, c'est Dieu seul qui pouvait mériter la médaille. Voilà à peu près ce qui m'a beaucoup façonné dans la lecture. Merci.
Thank you. I'm not getting a translation.
Okay.
Je voudrais également.
Okay. So he was saying that what's really striking me is about the leader. He was really already Christian. He noticed that his people really need Christianity. So at the end, he said that the one like deserve the medal is God.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Oui, je voudrais dire également que de prime abord, ce qui m'a tiqué, c'est même le titre du livre,
So
Le
really,
roi, le sage et le
what
bouffon.
really struck me is the title of the book, The King and the Wise. I can hear.
Ce que je peux retenir déjà du titre du livre, c'est que toutes ces trois personnes, que ce soit le roi, le sage et le bouffon,
So
ce sont des
both of three
personnes
persons,
qui
whatever the
représentent
king, the
le monde.
wise, they represent the world.
Et leur approche, comment est-ce qu'ils ont cherché à découvrir la vérité à travers la religion, démontre également comment démontre également comment est-ce que les hommes sont à la recherche de la vérité. Et c'est pourquoi ils ont fait appel à ces différentes religions pour être à leur écoute.
To come to listen to them.
Okay.
Et qu'à travers leur discours, ils puissent découvrir la vérité.
And through the discussing, the speech, they may discover the truth.
Okay. Thank you.
Je vais m'arrêter là.
Moi aussi, comme tous mes prédécesseurs, j'ai beaucoup apprécié le livre.
Like we have said, I will appreciate the book.
La manière dont on conduit pour avoir la vérité, la vision du monde des autres.
It was good to have the opinion of other people about the worldwide vision.
J'ai surtout apprécié la manière dont le chrétien a vraiment présenté la vision biblique du monde.
I really appreciate the way you have introduced the worldwide view about the Christian biblically.
La first note que je pourrais signaler, je me demande pourquoi est-ce que, parce que quand on lit le livre, hein, c'est vrai qu'on a vu plusieurs personnes qui ont pris la parole, mais c'est l'auteur, ce sont les connaissances de l'auteur qui l'a exposé.
So when you read the book, you may say a lot of things, but it's the knowledge of the author that is in the book.
Mais je n'ai pas vu prendre position véritablement.
So I couldn't take one side exactly.
Voilà, chapitre devait, au terme de ce livre-là, prendre position.
At the end of the book, I feel like I take a position.
Parce que je pense qu'il est chrétien, il aurait dû clairement dire la vision biblique en tant qu'auteur chrétien dans ce livre, pour que ça puisse véritablement, parce que quand on lit le livre, c'est comme si c'est un livre que tout le monde pouvait lire. Et c'est
when you read a book, it's like it's a book everyone should read.
Voilà, et donc pour moi, ça m'a laissé sur ma soif du fait qu'il n'est pas.
For me, like it first for me after reading, like I feel always first to read again.
Ah, merci.
So
thank you. Thank you. Merci. So it sounds like the book was helpful.
J'allais ajouter.
Beach, yes.
Je peux ajouter quelque chose?
Can I add something?
Yes. Bon, comme c'était un jeu olympique, en principe, il fallait qu'il puisse avoir quelqu'un qui aurait gagné. Alors, en lisant, je n'ai pas compris pourquoi le roi, qui en dernière minute a reçu la révélation, il a hésité. Peu de questions pourquoi il a eu peur. Même dans mon devoir, j'ai expliqué, il arrive des moments où la vérité, comme Josué l'a fait, il a dit aux enfants d'Israël, moi et ma maison serviront l'Éternel. Donc, je n'ai pas vraiment apprécié la conclusion. Il pouvait dire clairement, comme il l'a fait là, mais il pouvait maintenant influencer son peuple par son choix. Comme il l'a présenté, on n'a pas une religion adoptée, mais voici. Vous voyez ce que lui-même, il a eu comme révélation. Parce qu'on dirait que les gens ont senti que le roi avait reçu quelque chose. Parce que c'est resté un moment très silencieux. Je voulais que le roi puisse dire sa position, bien tout en laissant à chaque peuple de faire le choix de sa religion. Mais au moins, lui, à cause des convictions qu'il a eu en dernière minute, il pouvait agir comme il. Merci.
It should have act like Joshua in the Bible.
Je peux dire quelque chose?
Can I add something?
Yes. Olivier, can you mute them while you're translating for me?
Okay.
Ok. Ce que moi je vais ajouter dans ce que c'est tonton Plo ou Papa Bichon dit, le roi a pris sa position. Lui, il s'est souvenu de ce comment, si c'était quand il était dans son enfance, il va battre à l'église et autres. Et il a pris position pour lui-même. Maintenant, je crois que ce n'est pas... C'est un livre qui est fait pour les lecteurs. Celui qui lit la position du roi. C'est une histoire. Donc, dans le récit, le roi, on montre clairement la position du roi. C'est fait pour le lecteur. Ce n'est pas fait pour... Comment dire ça? Ce n'est pas un film qu'on s'attend à ce qu'il influence d'autres personnes. C'est fait pour le lecteur. Et quand le lecteur lit, il voit la position du roi. Donc, s'il a une s'il veut être... Moi, je pense que l'auteur a communiqué sa pensée. Il a communiqué la religion qu'il a choisie au travers de ce que le roi a dit. Lui, maintenant, la foi ne s'impose pas.
Muriel, hold on 1 minute. Olivier, when you're translating, I hear both of you talking at the same time and I can't understand you. I'm sorry. Can you, is there any way to...
Yeah, they should shut down the mic. Many mics are open, so we should shut it down.
Okay.
Donc, comme Patrick traduit déjà pour lui, quand on parle en français, tu peux simplement laisser Patrick traduire pour lui dans l'autre côté anglais, là, c'est tout. Tu peux traduire ce qui est dit en français.
Ok. Vous entendez les deux versions en même temps? Ok, donc j'étais dans la partie anglais. Voilà. Okay. Oui, j'ai mis, il a mis un casque. Oui. Voilà, c'est ça. C'est ça. Donc, il faut que Biche fasse ça.
Non, c'est à toi. Parce que moi, j'ai déjà fait. Donc, on dirait le paramètre, ça se trouve à ton niveau.
Oui, je viens de mettre ça en anglais. Je mets ça maintenant en anglais.
OK.
OK. Can you hear me, Chris?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Does it sound well now?
You sound fine. It's just when the other person is talking, I hear the translation and them at the same time.
Oh, okay, I see now. Okay. So she was saying that what was Bish was saying is not totally right because the author was showing exactly his position. So he write a book for the readers. So when you are reading, it's like you are in the mind of the king. So it's like you take a position of the king. So when you are reading, it's like you are telling the story of a king. But at the end, the author showed clearly the position of the king, and he gave a right to people to choose which religion exactly they want to follow.
Right. Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. Good thoughts. Anyone else? I've not caught everything that's been said so far. So
Can we talk about application? Oui, pour moi, comme les autres ont partagé, les livres intéressés. Excusez-moi de ne pas trop donner de commentaires sur ma lecture.
A lot of commentary about my reading.
Surtout sur l'application.
Is about the application.
Je travaille dans un groupe avec les professionnels.
So I'm working for the young professional.
Ce livre m'a appris l'importance de toucher des personnes bien positionnées dans la société.
So this book taught me how to find a good people in the society which can work with them.
Ça nous donne une opportunité donc de toucher d'autres personnes autour de lui et même des gens sur qui il a l'influence.
So it also gives us opportunity to touch other people around us, those are really influential people around our society.
Et c'est ce que j'ai surtout appris du roi.
So this is what I learned from the king.
Good. Good, thank you. That's good. Yeah, it's good to think about how it applies to your ministry. That's very good. Yeah, I find that often in evangelism, when sharing my faith, it makes a big difference if they feel like you understand their view and you have respect for them. I find that makes a big difference in how they will listen to what you have to say. That's how I find those kinds of books helpful. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the notes, and let's talk a little bit. We're going to be getting into these different religions a little bit more. I'd like to hear thoughts a little later on the C.S. Lewis reading and the Reasonable Faith reading. We'll talk about that a little later. I wanted to go back to something we talked about at the end of our day yesterday. Someone asked about why we won't sin in heaven. and I felt like I wasn't sure if the answer I gave was as helpful as it could have been. So I wanted to briefly touch on that again, because it's such a good question, such an important question. So I found really that there's two basic answers. One answer is that when we get to heaven, God does something to us. He changes us in a way that we no longer can sin, or no longer have any desire or any intention to sin, inclination to sin. So there could be something that God does to us. He changes us in some way that we simply aren't able to sin and don't even want to, and would never want to. So that's one way to think of it. Another way to think of it is that there's choices that you make in this life that create a certain kind of character. And so that when you get to heaven, your character is shaped in such a way that you simply aren't capable of sinning. And it's not something simply that God does to you, but it's something that has happened to you over your lifetime, and that I think, put together with what Jesus has done on the cross, that is a very powerful change in your life. So, for instance, Hebrews chapter 10, it says that Jesus, by a single offering, has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. So the work of Jesus on the cross and our basically accepting that salvation and growing in our faith with him, it perfects us to the point where we're not capable of sinning, just because our character has been shaped in that way. So for right now, there are things probably that you're not capable of doing now, certain kinds of evil acts that you simply could not do because of the kind of person you are, because of what God has done in your life. So it could be that when you're in heaven, either God does something to you to change you, or because of the work on the cross that Jesus has done, and your acceptance of that it transforms you in such a way that you no longer are capable of sin, and you would not even desire or have any reason to sin. So sin would just never happen. Now, technically, could you be free to do it if you were to want it? Perhaps. I'm not sure about that, but the point is that you would never ever desire it or want it. So whether or not you could possibly do it is irrelevant. So that's the view I would have, and I think it's different than the Garden of Eden, because Adam and Eve, even if they were in a sinless state, they had not experienced the work of the cross of Jesus. So the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus is a special event that has had an effect on us that changes us in a very dramatic way. And Adam and Eve did not have that. That's why I think we can exist in heaven and not be capable of sin. So I hope that helps a little bit more. But it's a difficult question, for sure. Okay. Well, let's
aide un peu. J'avais demandé ça justement par rapport à Adam. Et je me suis dit, certainement, il doit y avoir une différence entre Adam et le monde futur. Ce qui m'a poussé à poser la question, c'est que on dit les 3 premiers chapitres de Genèse représentent un monde parfait. Et après, c'est la chute. Après, c'est comme si on retrouvait le premier monde parfait, mais tel que ça se présente, la gloire à venir n'a rien à voir avec le premier monde d'Adam. Que si ça ressemble à celui d'Adam, ça veut dire qu'il y a cette possibilité de libre arbitre que cette possibilité sera créée que Dieu établira désormais.
Okay, I didn't get a translation for that. Did someone summarize what he said in English? I'm sorry. Yes. Yes, I think that's right.
Yes, I think that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, Young. Okay, I'd like to go ahead and move on with our notes for today, our lecture for today. Let me share the screen. Okay, just to review where we are at this point, we're up in the third section, our last 2 days, so in the home stretch. We're going to be talking more about analyzing and understanding other people's worldviews and being able to communicate with them about our worldview and be able to talk to them about their worldview. So, and then of course, applying these specific skills, how we can apply them to our ministry. So that's what we'll be covering these next 2 days, getting into more specifics about worldviews and what those worldviews teach and what they hold. So in your notes, you should have a page like this with the 3 circles. And this is really, most worldviews could be grouped into 3 categories. Of course, you have the Christian theist worldview, or you could just say theistic worldview in general, the naturalistic worldview, and the pantheistic worldview. These are the 3 biggest categories. And just to give a quick breakdown on the main differences between these, in Christian theism, we believe that, so if you think of this as creation, and the circle is not just the earth, but it's the entire universe. So you have creation, and then you have God outside of creation, separate from it, existing before creation as the creator, but he acts in creation. He comes into creation, interacts with us, and causes things to happen in the creation. So he's active in the creation. In naturalism, you just have the creation, but it's not really creation because no one created it. It's just always, or it just came into existence by itself somehow. But there's no God involved. It's just physical objects, just atoms put together in different ways. And then, of course, the pantheistic view, you have creation, you have a world, but God is somehow one with the creation. God and the creation are one and the same. And everything is a part of God, and God is in every part of creation. Which is different than in theism. God is present. He is present everywhere, but he is not actually the things themselves. So in theism, God is present in this room, but he is not the room. He's not the same thing as the room. He's present in me, but he's not the same thing as me. Whereas in pantheism, God is literally the same thing as this computer and the same thing as me. I am God and you are God. Everything is God. Those are the 3 big categories. And here's a chart. I think you have a chart, something like this in your notes. How these views answer some of these big questions. What is prime reality? In theism, it's an infinite personal spirit. Naturalism, it's infinite, or reality is non-personal. It's just the material cosmos. And then in pantheism, you have God, but it's a non-personal God. It's just identical to the world. External reality in theism is dualistic, meaning there are 2 things. There's matter and spirit. In naturalism, it's monistic, meaning there's just one thing. It's just the material universe that's self-existent. It explains itself somehow. And in pantheism, it's also monistic, meaning there's just one thing, and it's spirit. Everything is really spirit. The physical world is just an illusion. Really, all that exists is the spiritual world. Humans on theism are made in God's image. are created good but fallen, and are both physical and spiritual. In naturalism, humans are just highly evolved animals or complex physical machines, just physical things. And in pantheism, humans are sleeping gods. We're just trying to realize that we're actually God, and we're spiritual beings, and being an individual is an illusion. There are no individuals. We're all just one. We're all part of the same individual consciousness somehow. In death, in theism, there's judgment and transformation into a new state, either heaven or hell. Naturalism is you're just extinct when you die, you're gone. And pantheism, death is an illusion and you're reincarnated. And just an endless cycle until if you reach a state of nirvana or enlightenment. And then you just become one with the universe, one with Atman. Knowledge, in theism, we are endowed with a mind that can know truth. In naturalism, our minds are evolutionary adaptations, and the reliability is questionable, dubious, because it's only been evolved to survive, not to know truth. And in pantheism, the world is really beyond knowledge and beyond reason. Morality in theism, ethics is based on the character of God. Evolution, it's just an adaptation. Again, it's not true. Morality is not really true. It's just how things have evolved. It's just what we think. It doesn't matter if it's true or false. And good and evil are an illusion on pantheism. So, and you can imagine how these different views will affect what you think about the rest of life, about your work and families and the government. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the descendants of naturalism. So the naturalistic worldview has become much more prominent in the last few hundred years. And it has children, you could say. It has descendants. There's optimistic humanism. These are all sort of versions of naturalism. Optimistic humanism, nihilism, existentialism, and postmodernism. So when I was going to mention deism, I forgot to mention deism. I don't have that on the chart, but deism is sort of a halfway house or halfway point between theism and naturalism. Deism, we've mentioned before, is the view that there is a God who created everything, but then he left. He's not interested. He's not interacting with it at all. He's totally just separate. Creation is sort of like a machine that he turned on and left alone and let it run, just however it would go. And so it's deterministic in that everything is determined by physics, just like in naturalism, because God's not involved. Okay, the descendants of naturalism. You have a page in your notes where it talks about unpacking the options, and it has theism, deism, and naturalism. And I'm not going to go into detail more at this point on those, and we're going to kind of pass by that, but I'll just notice that theism, of course, mentions the ultimate reality is of course, God. In Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created. There's a quote from Alexander Pope, a poem where for deism, he says, "The first almighty cause acts not by partial, but by general laws." So on deism, everything that happens is just the result of physical laws, natural laws. So God is not actually guiding anything. He just set these rules of physics and chemistry and biology in place, and everything just operates by itself. And on naturalism, Carl Sagan is a famous author and scientist who said, "The cosmos is all there is, or ever was, or ever will be." And this is kind of a progression where people, theism was much more prominent, many years ago, hundreds of years ago. And then deism was kind of a step away from that toward naturalism. And eventually that was given up and people just became naturalists. Deism was popular in the 18th century. A lot of the founding fathers of the United States were deists. Okay. Any questions so far? I'll pause for a moment.
J'ai une question. J'aimerais savoir ce que les panthéistes, comment les panthéistes définissent-ils l'illusion?
Oh, that's a good question. I have a limited understanding of pantheism, but what I think they mean is that the physical world, like everything you can pick up and touch, that it's just an illusion. It's like you're dreaming, and it seems very real. You can touch it, but just like in a dream, things seem real, but they're not. You're not actually holding a phone when you're dreaming. You're just lying in bed asleep. So there's no phone, right? And so pantheists, many Hindu religions teach that that's what's going on now. So even though you seem awake, in reality, nothing you're touching is actually there. It's just an illusion, but your mind thinks that it's real. So, and good and evil, we think they're real. We feel very strongly about them, but they're not real either. They're just illusions as well. It means that there just is no such thing as good or bad. There just is. Things just happen. So I know it's hard to understand. I have a hard time understanding it. Does that help?
Dr. Chris.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit on the postmodernism worldview? What really characterizes the postmodernism worldview?
Good question. We're going to get into that in just a few minutes. We're going to talk a lot about it. That's where we're going.
Alors, quelles sont quelques religions panthéistes là? S'il peut me rappeler, j'ai oublié un peu.
Yes. And we are gonna talk more about it in a few minutes. We're just at the beginning, but so that would include most of the Hindu religions, perhaps Buddhist, the Buddhist religion, a lot of Eastern religions. So, yeah, I mean, the basic idea is that God is the universe, that the physical world and everything that exists is God, that God is not a person the way the Christian God is, but God is just simply a force, more like in Star Wars, just the life force, or just a being somehow, but not a personal being. Something has without personality. You couldn't communicate with it or pray to it. It doesn't perform actions. It doesn't. It's not involved or guiding anything. It just exists. And so that's the basic idea. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a few minutes. But I think having a basic grasp is good, but it's hard to say, well, pantheism is this, because it's very diverse. In India, they have, there's probably 1,000 different gods, and many different versions of Hindu religion. there is no one Hinduism. Hinduism is a collection of many, many religions altogether. So it's hard to describe exactly what one of them is. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but I encourage you, in this class, we won't go into great detail about Hinduism, but I encourage you to research it on your own. I'll try to answer as much as I can, but my understanding of it is somewhat limited.
J'ai une préoccupation.
I have a question.
Yes.
Oui. Ma préoccupation est que, bon, je ne sais pas si j'ai bien suivi le programme, du coup, je ne sais pas s'il y aura un moment où peut-être on peut nous dire comment nous, là, on peut, s'il y a des personnes autour de nous qui sont soit dans le panthéisme, que ce soit le bouddhisme, l'hindouisme, comment est-ce qu'on peut si on veut prêcher à de telles personnes, ou bien c'est nous-mêmes qui allons faire nous faire une idée ou un plan par rapport à ça, ou bien il y a un plan où il y a tout au long du cours, il y a une option ou une section où on montre comment est-ce qu'on peut aborder de telles personnes. Je ne sais pas. Parce que, au fur et à mesure qu'on évolue, vraiment on se rend compte que heureusement que c'est le Saint-Esprit qui fait le travail de convaincre les cœurs, parce que ça devient un peu too much, quoi.
So she would like to know if in the process of the different lesson, you have a plan where we can find a way to talk to the pantheism, the Hinduism, like a way specifically where we can use to talk to them, or nothing, like an example where we can use it to talk to those different people who have a worldwide vision differently.
Yes, we are going to get into that in more detail. I have to admit, Hinduism is probably the religion I know the least about. And we're not going to be able to cover all the religions in detail, but the general categories are the important thing that I'm trying to get to. That if you understand theism, then you'll have some grasp of Judaism and Islam and Christianity. If you understand naturalism, you'll have a basic grasp of some of the different versions of naturalism. If you have a basic understanding of pantheism, then that will help you understand in a basic way, like Hinduism, Buddhism. But details, we probably won't get into a lot of really specific details, but I think you'll find some helpful parts that you could take and apply and be able to have a conversation with. And that's something we'll discuss as well. So these ideas are things we're going to come up with as a class as well. So we'll be getting to that. Thank you for asking the question. But just one more thing I'll say is, in philosophy, which a lot of this is sort of a blend of philosophy and theology. But in philosophy, the goal in some ways is to teach you not what to think, but how to think. And so it's not to teach you, give you a script to here, go say this, but to teach you how to think about these things yourself and give you the resources to think about them so that you can come up with those things yourself. Because every situation is going to be very unique, and a specific script is not always helpful. So, and that's probably not what you're asking for, but I just wanted to make that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, so the descendants of naturalism, let's talk about these one at a time. So there are several options. One option in response to naturalism, as people have considered naturalism, is to accept naturalism, hold to naturalism, but deny its implications. So naturalism, really the implications of it are very depressing. There's no meaning, no purpose. You're not special. You have no inherent worth or dignity. You're here by accident. There's no such thing as love or justice. Those are just imaginary things we made up. No such thing as marriage or families. These are just things that we do to survive. They're not real or true. And so that's sounds like a very sad existence. So sometimes people want to accept naturalism, but deny the implications. And optimistic humanism is just that. It wants to say that there's no God and there's just a physical world and there's no afterlife, but you can still be happy. You can still have all the other things, love and meaning and all those things too, which sounds a little bit hard to believe, but that is what optimistic humanism is. And I think it's a great example of this is John Lennon's song Imagine. If you've ever heard this song, you know, John Lennon was one of the Beatles, the famous rock group from England back in the 60s and 70s. So I found this version of Imagine, the song, in French. I thought we'd listen to it. The words are it's a very nice song. John Lennon is a brilliant songwriter. And it sounds like a very nice thought, but it's just, if you listen to it closely, you can hear how disturbing it is in some ways. So here's a version of that song in French.
Imagine qu'il n'y ait pas de paradis. C'est facile si tu essaies. Pas d'enfer en dessous de nous. Au-dessus juste le ciel. Imagine tous les gens vivant pour le présent. Imagine qu'il n'y ait aucun pire. Ce n'est pas dur à faire. Rien à tuer pour lequel mourir. Pas de religion aussi. Imagine tous les gens vivant tous en paix. Tu peux dire que je suis rêveuse, mais je ne suis pas la seule. J'espère qu'un jour tu nous rejoindras. Et le monde vivra uni. Imagine aucune possession. Je me demande si tu peux.
Okay, I'll stop it there. You didn't get all the lyrics, but you got the important ones, I think. You know, this idea of, you know, imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. And the idea that if you imagine these things and you'll be better off because these things are what's pulling you down. You know, there's no cause to kill or die for, no religion to. Imagine all the people living their lives in peace, right? Because religion is the problem. If we could just get rid of religion, we'd solve all the world's problems. And that is incredibly naive. That is incredibly naive, because I think we know from history and we know from the scriptures, it's not religion that's the problem, it's human beings that are the problem. That war is caused not by any institution, but it's caused by human beings and somewhat by ideas, but human beings will have wars regardless of what the religion is. They'll always find an excuse for war. But the humanistic view is often thinks that religion is really what's wrong with the world. And so is religion really the problem? Well, let's consider the effects of naturalism. Naturalism has, of course, Darwinism comes out of this. At least the view that it is today is that, you know, you're just an accident. And you have really the only rule that matters is survival of the fittest, that the strong prey on the weak, and too bad for the weak. And that's the Darwinist view of the world without God. Of course, you have communism under Joseph Stalin. You know, and again, communism, there could be some good ideas there, but without God, you get what happened with Stalin. And in his own country, 20 million of his own people were killed. He was responsible for killing 20 million of his own people. And I thought, well, you know, of course, in Christianity, we do have the Crusades and the Inquisition that people often talk about. They'll think of these terrible things that the church has done. And so I looked up how many people died from the Inquisition. Actually, the Inquisition was very small. It was like 32,000 people. It's still awful. It's still terrible. But that's a drop in the bucket compared to 20 million. Now in the Crusades, many more people died, maybe 5 or 6 million. But in total, it's probably around 6 million total from the Crusades and Inquisition put together. And of course, in the Crusades, it wasn't just non-Christians dying, it was Christians as well. And then, of course, you have Marxist ideologies. Again, these Marxist ideas without God just lead us to a point where truth no longer matters and only power matters. It's whoever has the power can enforce their will. And if you have problems, it's because you lack power and you need to get it. And truth doesn't matter at all. And this is not a good way for the world to be. So the effects of naturalism are fairly negative. Well, what are the effects of religion? What is religion really done for the world? What has Christianity in particular done for the world? Well, the list is quite extensive. I'll go through a few of them here. You have the invention of the hospital and the university. These ideas that seem so normal and ordinary to us today were radically revolutionary ideas in the ancient world. The idea of a place where sick people could go to be taken care of, or a place where people could gather for learning formally. These were new ideas, and the church started. I mean, before the hospitals, before Christianity, if you were sick and dying and diseased, well, too bad, right? You must deserve it in some way. You must have done something. If you were an orphan or a widow, tough luck, you know. Guess that's not so good for you. Only the strong survive. But the Christianity takes care of the weak and the sick. You have charities for the poor and needy that are organized. That's new, believe it or not. You have literacy, this emphasis on literacy, that everyone should be educated, everyone should be able to read, not just the elite, not just scholars, but even the common people. Everyone should learn to read. You know, atheists like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, they can read and write because of Christianity. They can thank Christianity that they had an education. There's a belief in human equality and equal human dignity. That's a radical idea that came about because of Christianity. It was not true in the ancient world prior to the advent of Christianity. People were not equal. People were considered, some people were better than others, more important, more valuable than others. And of course, this human equality lays the basis for the idea of human rights in international law. The idea that every human being has a right to be treated in a certain way, that has a certain dignity and value. Again, that's a radical idea and is really something Christianity has brought to the world. You have the abolition of slavery. While it was true that people used Christianity to justify slavery, they tried to use the Bible to justify it. There is never a good case made for it. You cannot make a good case for slavery, to advocate slavery from the Bible. Those arguments were flawed. And the real result of Christianity is to take things like equality of human beings and human rights and extend that to every single person, which means slavery is wrong. And so Christians were the leaders in the anti-slavery movement. It was Christians that led the move to abolish it. And even the establishment of science is really a product of the Christian worldview. It was when Christianity took over and we began to believe that the universe was created by one God who was orderly and rational, and not like the ancient gods who were flawed and just driven by sexual desires or just petty. But the universe was created by a rational, omnipotent God who would put order into the universe, and we could just understand that order. That was a new idea completely, that the universe could be understood by the human mind. So those are some positive effects, just to counter what the optimistic humanists would say. Okay, well, there's another version of naturalism. You can take this approach. You can hold to naturalism and accept the implications. Have the courage to just accept them, how as dark as they are. This is often called nihilism, which is from the Latin. The word nihil which means nothing. So it's to believe in nothing, essentially, right? That nothing matters. That nothing really transcends physical world. Friedrich Nietzsche was a famous nihilist philosopher, and his view was that God is dead and everything is permissible. That was something he was famous for saying. Because if there's no God, then nothing matters. You can do whatever you want. There's no morality, no limits. And he wanted to go back to the ancient way of survival of the fittest, and the strong rule and the weak, tough luck. And the idea is to use your power and gain power. So that's the second version of naturalism. Third version of naturalism is, again, to hold to naturalism and accept the implications, but to still try to find meaning and purpose anyway. And this is what we often call existentialism. And it was an attempt to accept the implications of naturalism, the dark implications, but to say we're just going to try to make meaning for ourselves anyway. So it's not optimistic like optimistic humanism. It's a dark view, but it's a view that says even in the darkness, we're going to try to have meaning. So the idea of existence precedes essence. So in the traditional view, in the Christian worldview, your essence comes before your existence. So you have a nature, a fixed nature that's created by God that we all share, and you're born with it. And then you live out your life and you become a certain kind of person, but you already have a set nature. You can't become whatever you want to be. Certain things will be good for you and certain things will be bad because you have a nature, an essence, and then you exist and live out your life. But in existentialism, your existence precedes your essence. So you exist, you make choices, you live out your life, and you determine your own essence. You make up your own nature. You be whatever you want to be. Jean-Paul Sartre was a famous advocate of this view. You see his picture there. And his view was that life is absurd. So he agrees with the nihilist that life is ultimately meaningless and absurd. All the things we do are actually without any real purpose or truth. But you have to create your own meaning. So you create your meaning just by you accept that there's no God, you accept that there's no afterlife, but you just try to press on and be a good person anyway, or find some way to have happiness anyway. Okay. And then Sartre was famous for saying, life begins on the other side of despair. So once you come to grips with that despair of nothingness in the universe, then you get over it and you move on and you just sort of create meaning and you just try to make your life count. And then really the last response to naturalism is postmodernism, which we're going to talk more about in a moment. But on this view, you hold to naturalism and accept its implications, but it has a very different flavor from the others. So the main features of postmodernism are to reject the idea of objective truth altogether, because even many naturalists accept the idea of objective truth. They think there is a fixed way the universe is. You can know what's objectively true. It's just that they think the truths are very different from what we think they are. But the postmodernists have rejected objective truth altogether. There's no one has the truth with a capital T, or verite with a capital T, I suppose. Okay, we're going to talk more in just a minute. So we're going to spend a little more time on postmodernism in a moment. Jean-Francois Lyotard was the fellow in the picture there. That's him, a famous postmodernist. And so pantheism is a rejection of naturalism, just as Christianity is a rejection of naturalism. And this is another option, right? A response to naturalism, to just reject it completely and to think that the world is just nothing but spirit and illusion. And I thought this clip from this movie, I wanted to try showing this, is a good example of trying to explain this idea of pantheism a little bit. And just I'll give a little bit more detail. It's still in a sort of abstract way, but with some humor. But I thought we'd look at this.
Okay. Let's get started.
Is this part of my investigation?
Yes. Say this blanket represents all the matter and energy in the universe, okay? You, me, everything. Nothing has been left out, all right? All the particles, everything.
What's outside this blanket?
More blankets, that's the point.
Blanket's everything.
Exactly. This is everything, okay? Let's just say that this is me, right? And I'm, 60-odd years old, and I'm wearing a gray suit, blah, blah, blah. And let's say over here, this is you, and you're, I don't know, you're 21, you've got dark hair, etc. And over here, this is Vivian, my wife and colleague. And then over here, this is the Eiffel Tower, right? It's Paris. And this is a war, and this is a museum, and this is a disease, and this is an orgasm, and this is a hamburger.
Everything is the same, even if it's different.
Exactly. But our everyday mind forgets this. We think everything is separate, limited. I'm over here, you're over there, which is true, but it's not the whole truth, because we're all connected. Because we are connected.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, now, we need to learn how to see the blanket truth all the time, right in the everyday stuff. And that's what this is for.
Why?
Why what?
Why do I need to learn how to see the blanket thing all the time in the everyday stuff?
Well, you wouldn't want to miss out on the big picture, would you?
Uh-uh.
That's partly why you're here, right? And this is it. I'm talking about it right now. I mean, it'll take a while for you to get it, you know? But it'll help you.
So I hope that came through in the subtitles. Did that come through all right? Okay. So the idea there, and this is a pantheistic, a very pantheistic point of view, is that everything is one, right? You and me, we're all connected, not just relationally, but in reality, ultimately, we are actually part of the same thing. We're all literally just one thing, different parts of one thing. And God is just one part of all of us. So now that's an interesting idea. And I think there's truth to that in the sense that we're all connected relationally, and we're all created by God. But I'm not actually you, and you're not actually me. And a thing he said there, I think I stopped it too early, but he says, if this is true, then everything you could ever want or be, you already are and have. So anything you could ever want, you already have it because you are one with the universe. And everything you want to be, you already are because you're one with everything. Which sounds great, but it's crazy, right? Because are you going to tell a starving person, you already have all the food you need because you're one with everything? Or if you want to tell a person who is trying to become an artist or a musician, well, you already are. You don't need to try. You don't need to work at it. Because you're one with everything. You're one with the music and with all musicians. That I just can't see how that makes any sense. So it sounds like a great idea that would give you a lot of peace and help you just relax and take it easy. But it just seems crazy to me. So, I mean, people who follow religions of this type often just think there's a very passive perspective there, that the universe just is the way it is and there's no use trying to change anything. It's all an illusion. So that's kind of one perspective on pantheism. A couple other thoughts here. Again, pantheism, God is the universe. And this is hard to get your mind around because we're so used to thinking of God as this personal being who's separate from the universe, but it's not even the same. We use the word God when we talk about pantheism, but it's really nothing like the concept of God that we have in theism. God is just the universe. And so are you. Thou art that. It's one of the famous sayings of Hinduism. Thou art that. You are that. Look at anything in the world that you can point at, and that's you. Right? You are God. You are the computer in front of you. You're the chair you're sitting on. You're the tree outside. You are everything. So a funny story. When I lived in Atlanta, another city in the United States, one day I was in a donut shop, and the fellow working at the shop was a Hindu, and we got into a conversation. I was talking to him about my faith, and he said, "Well, I believe that everything is God, that I'm God." And he said, he pointed to the toaster that was sitting right there. And he said, "The toaster is God." And I think I laughed a little bit because it just sounds so crazy to me, that the idea that God is a toaster. But that was literally true on the pantheistic view. So other implications, I'll just open this up for a little discussion here. So for instance, let's just keep it on pantheism for a moment. If this is true, that everything is one, and the physical world is an illusion and there's no individuality, etc., what are some implications for life and society? What are some implications there? This is where we have to use our imagination a little bit.
Pour moi, je pense que les gens vont s'identifier aux choses et vivre beaucoup plus dans une illusion sans penser à leur avenir éternel. Ils vont aspirer à des choses, à des idéaux qui ne vont jamais se réaliser. Parce que cette façon de voir Dieu, ou bien le panthéisme, nie carrément l'existence d'un être suprême auquel nous devons rendre compte à la fin de toute chose.
Yes, I think that's right. Now, we should point out, if you go to India and talk to Hindus, there are a lot of really good people. I mean, it doesn't mean they're bad people or that they don't have any morality. It's just that if you live as a Hindu, this is my own opinion here, but I think if embracing the Hindu pantheistic religion, fully embracing it, and living your life as if there were moral laws and purpose in the universe, and like trying to become something, having ambition is a good idea. Striving to improve yourself is a good idea. Then it's inconsistent. It's not consistent with the pantheistic worldview. And so I think there's just a tension there. Whereas in the Christian worldview, all those things make sense, right? It makes sense that you're morally accountable for your actions. It makes sense that you would want to strive to be good stewards of your gifts and abilities, to develop them. It makes sense that you would think there's purpose to your life and meaning. It makes sense to think that we should help those who are sick and suffering. But none of that makes sense in Hinduism or in pantheism. So other thoughts, implications on life if you were to fully embrace pantheism? How would it affect your life if this was your worldview? Yes.
Oui, je disais qu'une autre implication, c'est que toute chose serait déifiée. Puisque le panthéiste voit Dieu partout, tout le monde, toute chose et tout le monde sera déifié.
Yes. Yes, even Hitler, right? Even the most horrid person you can imagine.
Bon, l'autre implication que je vois, c'est peut-être quand tout est Dieu et que on est Dieu, il y a la question de l'immortalité que je vois là. Oui, je disais que il y a la question de l'immortalité dans ce moment.
Je peux prendre la parole? Ok. Moi, je vois si on adopte une telle vision et que cette vision admet que le diable existe, le diable aussi serait Dieu.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Bruno, do you have a thought?
Il y a aussi le problème du genre.
Yeah. Gender is an illusion.
Donc, je disais que on aura encore aussi le problème du genre parce que c'est difficile de dire que je suis féminin ou je suis masculin.
Yeah, exactly. But of course, you know, most people who are pantheists probably have very firm ideas about gender, just the traditional view. It's just that there's no real foundation or grounding for that view in their worldview, right? There's no real explanation for why there would be distinct genders in their worldview. In their worldview, men are women and women are men, and you're a cow and you're a toaster, right? You're everything. I don't want to sound like I'm, if I were speaking with the Hindu right now, I'm probably being too loose with what I'm saying right now. It sounds like I'm belittling Hindu views or pantheism, and I don't want to do that. So if a Hindu were here listening to us, I would have to apologize because I'm not being very charitable. But I just need to say the same thing, but in a kinder way. But I think that is a strange implication. Anything else? These are what later we're going to call fault lines, right? So a fault line on the Earth is a place where an earthquake is likely to happen, right? A fault line is a sort of a crack or a gap between plates on the Earth's surface. And it's a place where there's a lot of instability. So every worldview has some fault lines. And so it's good to be able to identify what are the fault lines or what are the problems with a particular worldview that it may be helpful to ask about these sorts of things. You know, like, well, if you're speaking to a pantheist, perhaps a Hindu, and you ask them, well, do you believe that there really are such things as men and women and that they're different? And if they say yes, and you say, well, isn't it true in pantheism that everyone is just one thing and everyone is connected in such a way that you are me and I am you, and there's really no distinction? Isn't it just an illusion that gender is an illusion? And I suppose they'd have to say yes. You know, you might ask, does that make sense to you? So these are questions. It gives you ideas for questions you can ask people. Another implication I thought of is that, you know, individual rights don't really matter. If it's just an illusion that our separateness is an illusion, why should I care about individual rights? Because, you know, I can treat you however I want because, well, you're me, right? So there's no distinction. I can do whatever I want to whoever. There's no individuals, right? We're all just one. So there are no individuals. So how can individuals have any rights? What about reincarnation? If reincarnation is true, what would be implications of that?
Pour moi, vont vivre.
Je dirais que tout va devenir sans forcer. On va dire on ne force pas. On attendra certaines situations quand on va devenir ceci et d'autres quand on va devenir cela. Plus on doit s'incarner dans plusieurs matières ou dans plusieurs choses. C'est bon?
Yeah. But of course,
oui, je peux dire que des gens vont vivre sans souci dans le péché, tout en espérant qu'ils vont se réincarner en plusieurs vies pour pouvoir expier cela. Bon, c'est mon idée.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, of course, you might be reincarnated in a lower life form, but you can still work your way back up, right? You can, there's always time to fix it. But the truth is, I guarantee you, if you go to India and you talk to people, they're trying to be good people. right? They're not living as if it doesn't matter. They're living as if it does matter, which is not consistent with the worldview, right? That's consistent with a Christian theist worldview. You know, other potential, oh, we're past time for a break. I need to take a break. I'll just say a couple more words and then we'll take a break. Another big thing about this is in pantheism, there would be no need to alleviate suffering, to help those who are suffering. Because if people are suffering, it's because of things they did in their past life, that they are getting what they deserve. So people who are rich and wealthy and born in powerful families, they deserve that because they were good in their past life. And people who are born sick and diseased and blind, they deserve that because they were bad in their past life. And so there's no need to try to help people who are suffering because they're getting their just deserts. And that's, you know, honestly, I don't know a lot about Indian culture, but I know that, you know, there's still a caste system there, and there's still a group of people at the bottom of that hierarchy called the untouchables, who still have a very difficult time ever making any progress in society because they're considered sort of at the bottom level, and that's where they belong. And that's a troublesome implication in their society. So all right, well, let's take a break. We're past time. Let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 33 after the hour, or 34, I guess. Okay, c'est bon?
C'est bon.
Okay, we're back. I saw in the chat there's been some questions about whether the animistic religions of Africa are pantheistic. That's a really great question. And I regret that I haven't done some more research on animism. I would say it might be closer or better to fit them under the model of polytheism. So that's something we've referred to earlier as falling under one kind of theism. We have polytheism. So you have many gods. You might have major gods and minor gods. So I don't know if ancestors being deified could be seen as a lower kind of god than maybe than the main gods, perhaps. So in a polytheistic view, then you have to deal with many different gods, perhaps. You have to listen to and appease and follow the words of many different gods. Does that, I'm just speculating, but give me some feedback.
Patrick, il y a sur le canal anglais. Il y a sur le canal anglais, si tu peux revenir sur le canal français.
Please, Dr. Chris. Patrick, s'il vous plaît, on ne t'entend pas en français. Patrick, on dirait qu'il est parti en anglais.
Oui,
maintenant, c'est
bon.
bon. Maintenant, c'est bon. Donc, si le docteur Chris peut venir.
Oui, reprends, merci.
Je voulais savoir si c'est possible de poser une question qui me préoccupe par rapport à ce que nous avons vu jusqu'ici.
OK.
OK. D'accord.
Les ancêtres sont considérés.
OK.
OK. Jusqu'ici, nous voyons la vision du monde selon les différentes religions. Nous parlons de Dieu. Nous n'avons pas encore parlé de la question du diable et puis de ses démons. Alors, si le formateur, le docteur Christ, peut nous situer, est-ce qu'au niveau du panthéisme, par exemple, on admet que le diable existe? Du côté du bouddhisme, par exemple, bon, Voilà ce que je voulais demander. Parce que quand on croit que le diable existe aussi, cela aussi nous influence. Merci.
Yes, I'll try to answer that. I have limited knowledge of this, but again, in the pantheist view, most pantheists, I should say, good and evil are an illusion. And so there really aren't good gods and bad gods, or good spiritual beings and bad spiritual beings. There are just some that are more violent, like Kali. Kali is sometimes depicted as a very, this god with many arms and sharp teeth and holding knives, and very violent and scary. But other gods are presented very benevolent and kind and gentle. So, but they're not really seen as good and evil, or as they're just different faces of God, I think. So I think they wouldn't have a single devil like we have, but they might have gods that are responsible for the evil things that happen in the world. They might have demons who are responsible for some evil, but they wouldn't necessarily see them as, or they're responsible for the maybe suffering or bad things that happen, but they wouldn't necessarily see them as being evil. I don't think.
Une question, s'il vous plaît.
Sure.
Oui, je prends le cas de l'Inde, où quand nous suivons les informations, nous voyons que le viol n'est pas du tout un délit. Alors, est-ce que c'est une des implications du panthéisme chez eux? Panthéisme chez eux.
I feel like I'm speaking outside of my area of expertise, but I have some thoughts. I'll share my thoughts with you. I think that attitude towards rape is as a result of human sinfulness. But in some parts of the world, the gospel has gone forth, and Christ has come into a culture and has transformed that culture and is transforming that culture. And so their views about morality change. Their views about women change. Wherever you see Christianity in the world, you see the value and the dignity of women being lifted up. So I think without Christ, a culture without Christ may tend to have some very bad moral beliefs. And so, yes, it's part of the worldview. It's just not having the Christian worldview. Because only the Christian worldview can give you a true, real, sensible grounding for the dignity of women. And equality, right? Equality to men and women. So yes, I think it is a worldview issue. Okay, I want to press on. I love taking questions. I do want to press
Merci.
on. Okay, thank you for your question. I do want to move forward because we still have a lot of ground to cover, but we'll have more time for discussion. Okay. So I want to go on to talk about postmodernism a little bit. And in your cultures, after we talk about postmodernism, I'll ask a question. And that is, which of these alternative worldviews do you see most prominently in your culture? In America, it's postmodernism and naturalism are the big competitors. So postmodernism, there's a lot of ways to understand what it is. I chose this architecture, this picture of this building that was made because you can tell by looking at it that it looks like it's crazy. It looks like it's lots of ideas all put together in a very haphazard way, as if there's no one right way to do it. So postmodernism is, of course, it's a time period. That just means after modernism. Modernism is often thought of as sort of the Enlightenment, the scientific age of reason. And in modernism, reason was the highest value. Like, we really thought we could solve all the world's problems through logic and reason and science. But obviously we haven't solved all the world's problems. And so people have sort of given up on rationality and rejected it. They've given up on this scientific, rational view of the universe, that human reason can really figure everything out. They've given up on that and decided that reason just isn't that valuable. The rationality is not that big a deal. So the vision of the worldview of postmodernism is a conceptual, epistemological relativism. Epistemology has to do with how we know things and the evaluation of our beliefs. And that's my personal area of expertise, is in epistemology. But that postmodernism is very much about epistemology, because it says that we can't really know the truth about anything, and that there is no truth, but that we can't really come to solve all these problems through reason alone. Culturally, postmodern culture is connected, cynical, ironic, and then you can see styles in the art and architecture, as in this picture here. So there's a rejection of objective truth, right? That there's no truth that's true for everyone, right? There's nothing that's true that is sort of everyone is bound to. Even you might think, well, okay, maybe morality might be relative and maybe aesthetics might be relative, but surely science is not relative, right? Science is objective and it's true. So that if force is equal to mass times acceleration, as Newton taught us, then that's true for everyone, right? Whether you believe it or not, it's still true. But postmodernism has gone as far as to even say that is not even right. That rejecting science even is part of postmodernism, even a rejection of scientific beliefs. it's not as metaphysical as it is epistemological. And I've already explained a little bit about what that means, but it has more to do with how we know things, how we can solve problems, how we can discover things, how we understand truth. That we're simply not capable of knowing the truth about the world because we're too stuck from our own perspective. We can only see things through the lens of our own experience. And so we can't really see what's real. We're just seeing something through a lens of our own personal experience, and everyone's is different. So no one can see the objective truth. And there's an idea in postmodernism, you think about narratives, and narratives are conceptual schemes. Sometimes we think of narrative as a story. A narrative can be just like a structure that organizes your beliefs. Christianity is a narrative in that sense, in that it's a structure. It gives a framework that you can sort of hang your different beliefs on, a skeleton for your beliefs. And there are many different kinds of narratives, many different ways to understand how the world is organized. And a meta-narrative would be an overarching narrative that includes all the smaller narratives. So you have lots of narratives, different people's lives, different ideologies, and then you might have one meta-narrative that sort of explains everything. And postmodernism says there are no meta-narratives. We don't like meta-narratives. We don't want to believe in any meta-narratives, because a meta-narrative is that's just to say there's one truth above all the other truths. Truth with a capital T or with a capital V. But all we really have are just everyone's little truth. All truth is going to be relative to the individual, maybe to the culture, but certainly to the individual. That what's true for you is not true for me, and everyone has to find their own truth. You may hear that people say things like that. You have to find your truth. And to claim that Christianity is true with a capital T, meaning true for everyone, whether they believe it or not, objectively true, is wrong. It's not only not right, it's not correct, it's morally wrong, right? So in postmodernism, not only is Christianity false, but it's morally bad to be exclusive in our truth claims. In your notes, if you have the notes, I wanted to call your attention to there's a chart that compares modern to postmodern. I think this is interesting. Whereas the modern world is very individualistic, the postmodern world is communal. Modern is structured and postmodern is fluid. Everything can change according to your needs and experience because there's no fixed truth. Modern things are absolute, and postmodern things are relative. Modern has authority, and postmodern is relational. The modern world was word-based, and the postmodern world is image-based. The modern world is propositional, and the postmodern is visual. The modern is rational, the postmodern is experiential, right? So it's not about rational argument and logic. It's just about your experience, and no one can invalidate your experience. The modern is about progress. The postmodern is about suspicion. That anyone who comes to you to say that they have made progress or have discovered truth is to be sort of to be suspicious of that, because really they think that the claims to truth are really claims about power, and to claim that you have some truth is to try to exercise power over other people, and so there's always suspicion about that. The modern is objective. The postmodern is subjective. The modern has ideology. The postmodern has irony. Right? Because nothing's really true. So everything is sort of ironic because we're just confused about the reality of the world when we think that there is subjective truth, and we think that things have meaning, but they don't. Modern has religion and postmodern has spirituality, right? You can have your own personal way of being spiritual. Modern is cognitive, postmodern is aesthetic. Modern is concerned with truth, and postmodern is concerned with authenticity. So being real to yourself. So flipping forward in the notes, you'll notice that when it talks about narratives and meta-narratives, there's a diagram there of the 4 small circles, and then the one circle over on top of it. That's like you have many little truths, but there's no truth that overarches all those. That would be a meta-narrative. So here's I tried to draw kind of what it might look like. You have lots of narratives to help you explain parts of your life, right? We have the concept of a nuclear family, right? That the way that families should operate is you have mother and father and children. That's the nuclear family. And then you have extended family. And that's a way to think about life, right? That's a sort of a narrative or a structure. You have the ideas of psychology, right? That certain teachings about how the mind is connected to the body in certain ways and how the mind can be influenced in various ways, different disorders of the mind and how to treat them. So psychology gives us a way to think about the world. The scientific method is another way. Critical theory, which I don't know if that's come up a lot in your culture, but in America, this is a really big deal. Critical theory is, to put it in a crudely, it's the idea that it's not whether things are true or false so much as how they oppress people, right? Does a certain idea oppress minorities? Does a certain idea cause discrimination and mistreatment of certain groups? So ideas are good, not because they're true or have logical arguments behind them or evidence. They're good because they free the oppressed, and they alleviate oppression, and they raise up the minorities, and then which is great, which sounds great, but that's at the expense of objective truth. So I'm going to pause there for questions. Again, this is just an overview.
Oui, j'en ai une. Avec les postmodernismes qui rejettent la vérité objective, je suis en train de m'imaginer si 2 postmodernistes ont un conflit, comment est-ce qu'on va le trancher puisqu'ils rejettent toute vérité objective?
Well, one way that conflicts are resolved is through power, right? So whoever has the biggest following, whoever has the most influence, money, political influence, whoever has the most, the loudest voice, whoever can gather a bigger crowd, maybe whoever's physically stronger gets the win. And that's one way that conflicts can be solved. Another way would be to just ignore the pursuit of truth and don't worry, the conflict doesn't matter, and just coexist and without really resolving the conflict. But in as much as they can maintain their view, and even if it's contradictory to another view, as much as they can live with that view, they will. You know, they're not really worried about whether it's true or not. Richard Rorty, a scholar, a college professor who was famous for being a postmodernist, he said, truth is what... Oh, Richard Rorty. His name is in the notes just above the section I was talking about earlier, right under Friedrich Nietzsche and Richard Rorty, R-O-R-T-Y. But he would say truth is just whatever people let me get away with. That's truth. So that's how I imagine conflicts are resolved. Like in America, we have a problem now that if we tried to have a debate, say between 2 political candidates who held different positions on the right and left, instead of allowing that debate to happen and allowing both sides to speak, one of the sides would just try to gather a crowd to shout down the other side and shout so loud that the other side can't talk. And that would be a way of handling the conflict. Whereas in the diagram here, I didn't mention this part, but of course, all these small narratives can be totally encompassed and explained and understood by the overarching narrative of Christianity. That all of these things can be evaluated and placed underneath the biggest meta-narrative of the Christian worldview that explains everything. So other questions about the postmodern view?
Juste une observation. On dirait que c'est là où nous allons en tant qu'humanité, vers cette vision. Lorsque la raison ne tient plus. Par exemple, ce qui se passe aux États-Unis, je sais que David est plutôt docteur Christ. Tu peux aussi être conscient qu'il y a eu quelque chose. Mais comme on ne tient pas compte des raisons, on fait passer Biden. C'est une idée. Mais en même temps, avec la vision de l'ordre mondial futur, on dirait que c'est la vision du monde qui va diriger les futurs, n'est-ce pas? Quel est votre avis, quoi?
Yes, I think you're right about that. Other questions about postmodernism or thoughts? Well, here's another question then. Unless, Beach, did you have a question? So, in your culture,
non, bon, c'est juste des préoccupations.
Okay. So,
parce que lorsque la raison n'a plus de place, pensez-vous que la vérité peut être admise? Je crois que les systèmes vont faire que les choses commencent à changer. C'est peut-être la raison aussi pour laquelle on commence à inverser les valeurs. Ne voyez-vous pas, Dr. Chris? Alors, dans ma préoccupation maintenant, quelle attitude devons-nous adopter face au postmodernisme? Je sens que c'est vraiment très, très dangereux que les autres visions du monde vivent. Merci.
yes, good question. Good question. Well, I think one thing we can do as Christians is to make sure that we know our faith well, that we've learned to think logically and rationally, and that we exhibit that and we live that out in the world so they can see it. And hopefully that has an influence, but I think sometimes we have to challenge people's thinking. For instance, relativism is sort of, it's self-refuting, right? So if someone says there's no absolute truth, again, you can just say, well, is that absolutely true, right? Is that true for everyone? And if they say yes, well, then that's an absolute truth. And if they say no, well, then I guess absolute truth is not true for everyone. So to say there's no absolute truth is to say the statement I just made is not true. So, I mean, now people won't automatically be persuaded if you say that, but you can point things out like that they don't believe in moral relativism because, you know, if you were to steal one of their belongings, they would be upset. They would say that's wrong. And you could say, well, it's not wrong for me, right? But they would object. So people aren't really moral relativists, even though they say they are. Everyone believes there is a right and wrong. And that's, when you read Mere Christianity, that's very clear. C.S. Lewis makes that very clear, that everyone believes there's a right and wrong. We just sometimes disagree about the details. So I think the best thing we can do is just promote the Christian worldview to show that it's reasonable, as well as beautiful, as well as compassionate, and just let people see it. And I think it will shine, you know, it will outshine these other ideas, other ways of thinking. If we do it in a as Peter says, with gentleness and respect, right? When we defend our own worldview with gentleness and respect. We don't do it with anger or condemnation. We do it with gentleness and respect. But we have to be able to think well, to be able to model that. So of these different worldviews that we've talked about today, which of them do you see most prominently in your culture as competing with Christianity? Which of these worldviews do you think is most prominent in your culture?
Oui. Bonsoir à tous. Dans ma culture, c'est beaucoup plus la réincarnation familiale. C'est-à-dire que le fait que qu'un enfant naisse avec les mêmes traits qu'un parent, qu'un enfant naisse avec les mêmes traits que son oncle, son grand-père. Donc, c'est beaucoup plus la réincarnation familiale qui prime, en fait.
And Patrice, if I might ask Patrice a question. So how does the family reincarnation, how does that give guidance or explain other things in their lives? Does it guide them morally? Does it give them answers about questions of meaning and purpose and what's right and wrong? Or how does that help them to believe that? How is that a worldview?
Bien sûr que ça affecte plusieurs domaines de leur vie, à savoir une vie sans crainte de la mort, une vie en refusant catégoriquement la possibilité de l'évangile. Ça affecte leur manière de faire, ça affecte véritablement leur manière de faire. Une vie, ils peuvent se livrer à toute forme de choses en pensant forcément qu'ils vont revenir, en fait. Et ça amène aussi à beaucoup plus accentuer sur la notion de cultisme, la notion d'une existence après avoir vécu. C'est ça là. C'est-à-dire qu'il peut vivre n'importe comment, vieillir, mourir, donc ils vont revenir sous l'aspect d'un neveu, d'un oncle ou quelqu'un d'autre dans la famille. Donc c'est un peu ça.
Interesting. Okay, other observations about worldviews in your culture?
Moi, je dirais qu'il y a aussi cette influence au niveau du nom, parce que on pense que quand on donne le nom d'un parent qui était bien, l'enfant qui est né aussi aura les mêmes caractères, la même vie presque comme ce parent-là, et que quand on évite, même si c'était son père qui avait une mauvaise vie, on ne donne pas le nom à l'enfant parce qu'on pense que l'enfant héritera de cette mauvaise vie-là. Donc, il y a toujours quand même cette façon-là de réfléchir à l'incarnation. Ça influence quand même beaucoup plus la vie africaine, quoi.
Interesting.
Je voudrais aussi intervenir sur le fait qu'il y a une croyance très poussée sur ce que les ancêtres peuvent nous apporter dans notre culture. Donc, ça fait qu'il y a souvent il y a un culte très poussé vers les ancêtres. Et beaucoup de personnes pensent vraiment que les ancêtres influencent leur vie d'une manière ou d'une autre. Donc, c'est une vision du monde un peu animiste, quoi.
It's interesting.
Oui, je voudrais aussi prendre la parole pour dire que, surtout, toujours dans le contexte de la sœur, chez nous, on croit au verdict des ancêtres. Pour tirer toutes les conclusions des choses, on dit les ancêtres ont dit ceci, les ancêtres ont dit ceci, donc c'est ce que nous allons faire. Donc la croyance au verdict des ancêtres influence vraiment nos cultures, influence vraiment nos visions du monde aujourd'hui dans notre milieu africain.
Interesting.
Pour ma part, je veux dire que je pense que cette vision du monde, peut-être où on parle d'ancêtres, c'est en train de disparaître de la vision postmoderniste. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, nos sociétés modernes sont en train de copier sur l'Occident. Et donc, cette vision postmoderniste est en train de prendre la place maintenant où il n'y a pas d'absolu. Il n'y a pas d'absolu, on relativise pratiquement tout. Voilà, donc je pense qu'on est en train de tendre aussi vers une société postmoderniste en Afrique.
Yes. Let me say a couple words about that. Something I didn't point out is that the approach to reaching postmoderns and evangelism and sharing the gospel with postmoderns, I think it has to be very different than the approach with moderns. So if you think about the realm of value, goodness, truth, and beauty as being the three chief areas of value, modernists, if a person is very, very steeped in the modernist worldview, they're very scientific, they're very rational, they're very logical, then that would be the way to persuade them, using that sort of approach, trying to show that Christianity is true by reason and by evidence. If someone is more postmodern, then they are valuing the beauty more than truth. So there's goodness, truth, and beauty. They would probably be more interested to hear about the goodness or the beauty of Christianity than the truth of Christianity. That doesn't mean truth is not important. It is. But sometimes showing them the beauty of Christianity, just how amazing Jesus is as a person, his goodness and his appeal as a human being, and how Christianity meets so many of the needs that we have in our life, not just for forgiveness, but for meaning, for justice, for relationship, for significance. All these things can be, Christianity gives all these things. So I think sometimes making rational arguments is still important, but I think showing Christianity is true through the side of aesthetics and beauty is also very important. So that's one way. It's kind of an open door to postmoderns, is through the arts, I think, and through talking about God's just his appeal as his character and the beauty of the universe, God as the artist, that Christianity paints a more beautiful picture than any other worldview. That could also be true in talking with a person who's into ancestor worship. Talking about the goodness and beauty of the Christian worldview, as opposed to the animistic view, the ancestor worship, that, what Jesus has done for us, the idea of grace, rather than having to appease ancestors or living in fear of a witch doctor, that you can have peace with God through Jesus, I think would be attractive. Okay, so let's take another break. Let's take just like a 5-minute break, and then we'll pick up. I want to talk briefly about Islam. One question before we break: what percentage of your society, of your culture, is Muslim? How prominent is Islam in your culture? Yeah, well, yeah, maybe after the break. We'll talk about that after the break. I'm just curious to know how common it is. So 5 minutes. Come back at 23 or 22 minutes after the hour. 23 minutes. Okay, we're back. So yes, so how prevalent is Islam in your culture, in your countries? Is this do you interact with many Muslims?
Oui, on entend.
En Côte d'Ivoire, c'est environ 40%.
Okay. What about in Togo? You may not know a percentage, but maybe just, do you feel like it's there's a large presence of Islam in your country? Okay. Well, maybe not sure how to take that. The silence could be no one knows, or there are no Muslims there.
Ici, je demandais, on dit 24% au Togo.
Okay. Okay. So it's a large percentage.
C'est un grand. Parce qu'au Togo, il y a aussi les animistes, ils sont nombreux. Aujourd'hui même, dans le cadre de notre devoir, je suis allé rencontrer un grand prêtre de ce qu'on appelle la religion des sangs de nos pères. Les sangs de nos pères. Donc, c'est une religion animiste. Donc, il dit, ils sont nombreux. Donc, il varie entre 40, 33 à 42%.
Wow. What about in Côte d'Ivoire? Is animism very prominent there, Yara?
Oui, il y en a. Abraham le connaît bien. Il y en a. Oui, il y en a, ils sont autour de, je crois, peut-être 15%, 20%.
Wow, that's very different. Well, so I have a large section of notes here on Islam, and I want to, we can go through it. I also want to spend more time talking about animism, since I don't think I realized how prominent that was in your culture. So, but I don't want to spend more time than is necessary on Islam if that's something that you feel a need for. So it sounds like we'll go ahead and cover it, but I'll try to move quickly through it. And then at the end, I mean, I'm not an expert on Islam. Again, this is just some of this information comes from someone else that I borrowed it. But we'll move through it. Oh wait, 60. What was that in the chat? Wow. Okay. All right. I see. Okay. Well, there's a lot of great information on Islam in the notes. I'll just touch on some of the main points. And then we'll go to a section where we can, and tomorrow we'll spend a lot of time talking about how do we ask questions about other people's worldviews to stimulate conversations with them, and how do we help them see the fault lines in their worldview? How do we show them how Christianity compares and solves the problems that their worldview has? So, but today we won't quite get that far. But I'll share my screen and we'll talk about Islam here a little bit. Okay. So, talking about Islam in your notes, there aren't many blanks to fill in. Most of the information is there. You've probably heard a Muslim call to prayer, and I'll skip that for right now. That's probably not something that's you're not familiar with. So to answer the big questions from the perspective of Islam, that's what we'll do, just go through the big questions. Of course, what is real is Allah, right? And this is similar to the Christian worldview. Allah would be the creator God, eternal, but it's a very different concept of God in terms of his character and his actions. The ultimate nature of the world is that it's created by Allah. What is human being? A Khalifa. Human beings are Khalifas. We're, in a sense, we're creations of Allah, and he's made us vice regents of God. So we have rulership over the earth, ruling sort of in God's name, in God's place. Humans are basically good, but fallible. So that's one a big departure with Christianity, is humans are basically good. They're not born sinful. What happens at death? There's judgment. So that's similar. There's a resurrection. There's reward or punishment. How do we know these things? How do we know who God is and how to follow God? Well, it's the Quran and the prophets. So you have the written word and then you have the spoken word of the prophets. Again, similar to Christianity. Of course, one of the big ways that they diverge is the way that the scriptures came into existence. The Quran is was supposed to be dictated to Muhammad by an angel, and is a miracle because Muhammad was uneducated. But the Bible, of course, was written over, hundreds of years by many different authors, inspired by God, not dictated by God, but inspired by God, and grounded in real historical events and facts. So it's a very different ways to understand the reliability of these books. How do we know right and wrong? Well, we have the holy books, you have the Sharia law, you have prayer, and then Allah can tell you what's right and wrong. So it's not radically different from the Christian view. And then what is the meaning of history? It's linear, the creation to judgment. That is also similar to Christian worldview. These are points of common. Yes? Someone have a question?
Pasteur, si le test sort demain, ça ne respecte plus les règles de 72 heures.
Patrick, are you there? Oh, okay. Okay, so yes, just going through this very quickly. I understand this is not a detailed explanation of each of these things, but you can familiarize yourself with the notes. I want to leave time for some other things here. So in Islam, what is the basic problem and solution? It's that man chooses to sin. It's a choice to sin. And what's the solution? The solution is the 5 pillars, which you may be familiar with. The Shahada, which is the confession of Allah as the one true God and Muhammad as his prophet. There's prayer at certain times of day on a regular schedule. There is giving of alms to the poor. And then there's fasting at certain times, like Ramadan. And then there's the there's the Hajj, or the pilgrimage to Mecca. And these things are things a good Muslim would do, all of these things. I don't know if any of you have ever visited a mosque. I did one time. I visited a mosque here in Colombia, where I live, and talked with the imam for a while. I didn't participate in the prayer service, but I did watch some of it. But it's very interesting to see how they operate, how they do their prayers, the way it's structured. Ancient Christianity has a lot of similarities to the way they structure their prayer time. Even being on the floor as opposed to chairs was similar to ancient Christianity. So and of course, I already talked about the nature of history. So that's a very fast whirlwind through Islam. Rather than answering questions, because this is not an area of expertise for me, I have the notes there. There's a lot of information there. But we will be talking about skills that are general skills of asking questions that can apply to any worldview or religion. So as we start to talk about how we analyze and ask questions about others' worldviews and how we have these conversations, it will apply to Islam as it would to anything else. And hopefully we can squeeze in a little bit more conversation about animism and how to ask questions about that. Okay, so this last section, it's the last section in your notes, but we will be going back to cover some material from section 3 tomorrow. But this last section in your notes is about evaluating worldviews. So there's a quote here in your notes. I'll just read this from William Abraham. He says, religious belief should be assessed as a rounded whole rather than taken in stark isolation. Christianity, for example, like other world faiths, is a complex, large-scale system of belief which must be seen as a whole before it is assessed. To break it up into disconnected parts is to mutilate and distort its true character. We can, of course, distinguish certain elements in the Christian faith, but we must still stand back and see it as a metaphysical system, a worldview that is total in scope and range. So I want to deal with a few objections that are very common, and then talk about some general ways of going about evaluating things. This first objection is what is called the Loch Ness Monster objection. And are you familiar with the story of the Loch Ness Monster? I don't know how common that story is outside of Europe and America. Just by a show of hands, you can click the little hand button on your Zoom. Is this a common, you guys know who Loch Ness Monster is? I see one hand. Okay, maybe not everyone knows the story. So the Loch Ness Monster is supposedly a very large dinosaur-like creature who lives in a lake in Scotland. This grainy photograph was taken decades ago, and people thought it was the head of this monster. And so it's never been proven one way or the other whether there is such a being living in the lake in Scotland. Most people think it's just a story, of course, but a lot of people have a lot of fun talking about it. But often people, especially naturalists, will make an objection to Christianity like this. Say, well, Christians will say, well, you haven't disproven God, so therefore God must exist, right? And, so just like the Loch Ness Monster, they'll say, well, you haven't proven that it's not there, so it must be there, which is not a very good argument from a Christian point of view. But they the atheist wants to put the burden of proof on us, that if you want to prove there's a Loch Ness Monster, you have to show me, you have to do the work, right? You can say to the person who believes that they have to do the work in convincing you and not the other way around. It's often thought or claimed that naturalism is a philosophy that is neutral. Well, but in saying we all have the same beliefs, same basic beliefs, there's a neutral, scientific, reasonable way to look at things, which is roughly the same set of beliefs for everybody. And that amounts to naturalism. But theists have an extra belief, right? Supposedly we have an extra belief that no one else has, or that naturalists don't have, that God exists. It's an extra belief, therefore the burden of proof is on the theist, is on the Christian. In other words, in the debate about God's existence and the truth of Christianity, all the work has to be done by the Christian. And the atheist doesn't have to defend their worldview because their worldview is sort of the default neutral worldview. But of course, this is not correct. Naturalism is not the default view. And if you understand what worldviews are, then you understand that everyone has a total worldview. They have a collection of beliefs that fit together to explain reality. It's not that Christians just have this one extra belief. So we have a total package of beliefs, but an atheist has a total package of beliefs too, right? They may not have a religion per se, but they have a way of understanding the world that's a set of beliefs. Again, I'm going pretty fast here. But this is a false picture, not just because it's unbiblical, but because it misunderstands the nature of worldviews and how they work. The issue with respect to believing in God or not believing in God is a worldview issue. What is in view are two different worldviews, theism and naturalism. Every worldview has truth claims, beliefs, answers to the big questions. Every worldview, including naturalism, has beliefs about nature and ultimate reality. So naturalists have a belief as well about God. They believe that there is no God. So they have a belief about God, and we have a belief about God. The question is, which one is true? These are competing truth claims. They're both claims about reality, and they're in competition. And so the question is, which worldview is true? So the Christian doesn't have to do all the work. They both have to do equal work. So now let me move on to a more general model for evaluating worldviews. So when you think about a worldview evaluation, you begin with a hypothesis. And there's a quote from A.N. Whitehead in your notes. It says, "The true method of philosophical construction is to frame a scheme of ideas the best that one can, and unflinchingly to explore the interpretation of experience in terms of that scheme." So the hypothesis is sort of the worldview. You can think of a particular aspect of worldview as being a hypothesis about what is true, right? Suppose that such and such is true. Suppose that there is no God, or suppose that God and the universe are one, or suppose that God is a trinity. So you formulate the hypothesis, or in the case of animism, you say one of the hypotheses of animism is that our ancestors have an influence on us after their death, that they continue to have an influence on us, and we have to offer worship to them. So then you think about its implications. You look at the implications of each hypothesis. And then you wonder if the implications lead to any absurd beliefs, any contradictions. So for instance, if you have the belief that morality is relative or truth is relative, then you run into very serious problems logically. There are criteria and tests that can be done. You evaluate the worldview against reality in comparison to each other and according to a common test for truth. So you can ask, if the worldview claims that evil is an illusion, for instance, that there is no such thing as evil or suffering, that it's just an illusion, how does that fit with your experience of reality? Does that seem right to you, that suffering and evil are just an illusion? When I was studying for my graduate degree, my doctoral degree in philosophy, one of my colleagues, another graduate student, was a Christian Scientist. So I don't know if you're familiar with this religion, Christian Science. It's a strange name for the religion because Christian Scientists are neither Christians nor scientists. But her view, their belief is that suffering or sickness is an illusion and it's not real. And so traditional medicines are unnecessary. So she had been bitten by a spider on her hand, and she was concerned about the spider bite because she was told that it's an illusion and that it's all in her mind, and that she just if she just believes and thinks the right way, then it'll go away. But it wasn't going away, so she was concerned, and so she came to me to ask for advice on what she should do, and I told her she should go to a doctor, because that religion, it has this hypothesis about sickness. The implication is that you don't need medicine, but that didn't work, right? That did not fit reality. She was getting worse, and she was in danger from the infection. And so if your worldview doesn't really fit to reality, if it makes claims that simply don't match reality, then that's a way of evaluating them. You can weigh it, even check for internal consistency. Does it say things in the worldview that are contradictory? And once you've evaluated the hypotheses, you want to ask, well, what fits the evidence with the fewest difficulties? So every worldview has questions, has maybe hard things in it that we can't answer necessarily. We can't explain the Trinity satisfactorily in a satisfactory way to people. It's very difficult to explain. We can't say exactly what happens after death. We have limited information in the Bible. We can't explain why no one can come back from the dead. We have very limited information about that. So there are questions that can be asked. How could Jesus be fully God and fully man? These are difficult questions. So you might think every worldview is going to have some hard questions. Some have a lot more than others. So the question is, which worldview or which hypothesis fits the evidence? The evidence is things like our experience, the evidence of history, things like archaeology are relevant for Christianity, the scientific evidence. Which hypothesis best fits the evidence with the fewest difficulties? So the evaluation of worldviews is a little bit like an analogy of the jury trial, right? So the defense is going to try to make a cumulative case, or the prosecution rather than a single argument, they're going to make multiple arguments, right? Multiple experimental arguments. And you're not looking for a single proof, but for the best explanation of all the data. So it's not like there's one proof that will prove Christianity or any particular religion. You're looking at all the information as a whole. There's a range of evidence, right? You don't just look at one thing. The facts, data, physical evidence, testimony, right? So even Christianity, we have lots of evidence. There's a testimony of the scriptures. There's a testimony of other believers who've experienced God and experienced the power of Jesus. There's archaeological, that's scientific evidence for the historical accuracy of the Bible. There is experiential evidence, of course. You may have personal experiences. There's logical, philosophical evidence in the form of arguments for God's existence. So you have many different kinds of evidence to look at. And if the evidence tends to converge and agree on certain areas, then that's a strong support for a view. And you can evaluate competing hypotheses against each other to see which one best fits the reality that we live in. So, for instance, one reason I find Christianity so powerful in comparison to other worldviews is because it makes the most sense of my actual experience in the world. I think evil is real. There's an explanation for it. Christianity affirms that. I think that the universe is logical and can be made sense of in science. Christianity affirms that. Philosophically, the way I think God should be, I mean, what's demanded by reason, what God should be like. Christianity is consistent with that. What is right and wrong? We have a certain moral compass that sort of is inherent in us. I think Christianity is consistent with that as well. So the question is, I didn't write the question is. The question is, which hypothesis makes the best sense out of the most evidence with the fewest difficulties? So this is, as we're evaluating and testing worldviews against one another, what I find is Christianity comes out way ahead in terms of explaining the data and being supported by the evidence. So there are tests for evaluating worldviews, marks of truth. Here's just the picture of the picture here is of someone getting a COVID test, which if you've had one, it's very unpleasant. You stick that thing up your nose. So, so 3 tests. You want your worldview to be coherent. Coherent is the sense that it doesn't contradict itself internally. So it doesn't say God is a Trinity and God is not a Trinity, or Jesus is God and Jesus is not God, or murder is wrong and murder is not wrong, right? If a religion contradicts itself or is internally inconsistent, that's a problem. And that would be, the more you would see that in a religion or worldview, the greater the problem for that worldview. So a worldview that's more coherent than another one would be a better worldview. Is it factual in the sense, does it correspond to reality in the world as we know it in science? How much does it correspond to what we've learned about the universe and the way we actually live and our experience? And is it livable, right? Is it something you could actually live out and have a fulfilling life? So this is one of the problems with naturalism, is that it's hard to live out according to naturalism, to live a life that says there's no real purpose for your life, there's no meaning in the universe. Love is an illusion of biology. All the things that we think are really important are just social constructs like marriage, family, or you know, any kind of relationship is just a social construct. And that none of these things are true, that morality is just relative to individuals or just a creation of evolution. Nobody really lives that way. Nobody can live as a relativist. Nobody lives as a nihilist. People live out their lives as if Christianity were true. Most people in the world, they live out their life as if those aspects of the Christian religion are true, that there's purpose and meaning in life, that there's morality is objective. Even in the philosophy department at my university, you have many atheists, many naturalists in the philosophy department, but almost all of them believe in objective moral truth. They think morality is real and objective. They just can't explain why. But they inherently, they know that they couldn't live out a worldview. They couldn't live a life where they didn't believe in objective morality. They didn't believe where some things are good and some things are bad. So here's another example of coherence. If you believe that there is objective morality, but there's nothing more than physical matter, how can morals exist or be true? They aren't made of matter, right? Moral beliefs, moral truths are abstract. They're not made of atoms. Or if you believe that all humans are equally valuable and significant, then you can't believe we're the product of blind chance, right? Unguided evolution. If evolution is all there is, there's no God guiding it, then all beings are not equal. Some are more fit than others, right? We're not equal. There's no essence, there's no soul that we all share. There's no human nature. There's just biology, and some animals are stronger than others. So it's hard to see how you get human equality out of that. And then there's explanatory power as well. Does your religion explain why the world is the way it is? Does it explain why history is unfolded the way it has? If you think that man is basically good, you have a hard time explaining much of history, right? How have we gone so wrong if man is basically good? But Christianity holds that man is basically sinful, as well as created good but corrupted with a sinful nature. Then of course, all the evil we see in the world makes a lot of sense, because that's what you should expect if Christianity were true. Okay, I'm going very fast. So let me pause for a moment for questions, if there are questions.
J'ai une question.
Yes.
Ici, il s'est passé quelque chose. Une église qui fêtait sa fête de moisson a invité un féticheur, c'est-à-dire animiste, pour venir assister. Le féticheur a accepté, il a assisté au culte de la fête de moisson. Et à la fin de l'année, quand le féticheur aussi célébrait sa fête annuelle, comme ils ont l'habitude de le faire, il a invité les gens de l'église et les gens de l'église ont refusé d'y aller. Depuis, il s'est fâché, ils ont dit qu'ils ne sont pas sérieux et ils ne s'approchent plus d'eux. Comment peut-on expliquer ça? C'est vrai que c'est deux visions différentes du monde, mais le féticheur ou l'animiste espérait que les chrétiens allaient être tolérants pour aussi participer à sa célébration, comment dire, vaudou, bien de traditionnel. Et c'est aussi vrai pour chacun de nous, surtout en tant qu'évangéliste, qu'un traditionnaliste t'invite, tu ne peux pas aller parce que vous n'avez pas la même vision du monde, vous n'avez pas la même foi. Et c'est parfois aussi un frein à l'évangélisation. Donc, bon, c'est vrai que vous n'avez pas le même contexte, mais la vision du monde déjà nous empêche de cohabiter ou bien de vivre d'une manière qui est rigoureuse pour ne pas salir ou diminuer pour que les gens ne parlent pas de notre foi, même si nous savons que même quand nous y allons, nous ne croyons pas à ce qu'ils font.
So let me see if I understand the question. Is it or the comment, I suppose. Are you saying that, are you wondering whether Christians should go and to the witch doctor's practice or whatever he does, and should go and see what it's about? And
yeah, I just want to know if it is right that Christian will refuse the invitation of the animist or the fetish doctor, fetish priest, because he paid him respect when he attended the church service, the harvest celebration. But later, when he invited a Christian to come to also his harvest celebration, they did not come.
Yeah, I think that may have a lot to do with the specific details of that particular situation. I think, like, I'm perfectly happy, and I think it's great if I was invited by a Jewish friend to go to a synagogue or a Muslim friend to go to a mosque, I don't have any problem with that at all. But there could be some religion or view out there that does things that I would consider immoral, that I wouldn't want to participate in. If somebody, I mean, you can only imagine what that might be, but so I don't know if the witch doctor's celebration was involved doing anything that was wrong, morally wrong, then I could understand why they wouldn't want to do it. Now, if they're just doing things that are not Christian, like praying to other gods, I don't think that's something that will harm a Christian, right? I mean, Paul talks a lot about this in Corinthians, about meat sacrificed to idols, and how we know that in reality, those idols, those gods, so-called gods, have no power, that they can't harm you. It's not something to fear. And it's okay to eat the meat sacrificed to the idol. I think it would be similar to that. I mean, but if they're doing something immoral, that might be a different story. But I think in general, it's good to reciprocate, just because I think if you put two views on level ground, if you put Christianity on level ground with another view, Christianity is going to outshine anything.
Okay.
Does that help? I mean, if I didn't quite get your question, then please follow it up.
Yeah, it's okay.
Other questions? No, we've gone pretty fast.
Un autre point de vue par rapport à la proposition. Allô? Oui, je dis, dans notre contexte, par exemple, c'est vrai que nous sommes des évangélistes, mais est-ce que cela ne va pas nuire au témoignage? Parce que si jamais nous y allons et que une personne, vous aussi vous venez dans de tels lieux pour de telles pratiques, est-ce que ça ne va pas être un frein plutôt à l'évangile? Parce que la parole nous recommande également de ne pas être une pierre d'achoppement pour ceux qui sont faibles. Alors, c'est une question qui m'est venue à l'esprit également par rapport à ça.
So, in that context, who are the people that we would cause to stumble?
Other Christian.
Other Christians.
Yes.
So I'm not sure that affects our witness. If other Christians disapprove, then, you know, as Paul says, let them be convinced in their own mind. It's not as essential of Christianity, but I'm more interested in what the non-Christian thinks. Right? So that's why Paul says, you know, it's good not to cause others to stumble, but I don't think, or maybe what you're worried about is if I reciprocate and I go to the mosque, then a younger Christian who doesn't know much might think, oh, Christianity and Islam are the same thing. Is that what you're worried about?
Yes, possible.
Okay. That's a possibility if you're worried about like a new Christian who doesn't know much. But you can explain it to them, I think.
In fact, I think it depends on the purpose. And other people don't need too much to understand why you are there.
Yes.
Because if your purpose is to win them to Christianism, and you know what it takes to do that, you can pay this visit to them and knowing that even you have a limit. It's like when you go there, you will not submit to their practice. You will not pray. You will not go to pray their gods. You will not drink what they drink and maybe eat what they eat because they sacrifices to idols. And if you have a clear purpose for winning them, you just need to have some guidelines.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, we are out of time for today. So I've tried to leave time tomorrow for a lot of application talk, a lot more application to evangelism. So I'm looking forward to that and hearing more about your interviews if you've done some. So maybe I don't see if Gabrielle is here, but maybe someone could close us in prayer today.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Thank you so much. Est-ce que nous pouvons ouvrir nos micros et dire merci? Merci à Dieu encore pour cette grâce.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Nous disons grand merci à notre sœur qui nous a conduits dans le temps de prière, à l'équipe de la traduction, au pasteur Biche qui supervise la coordination, qui assure la coordination théologique. Et grand merci à notre enseignant. Nous bénissons le Seigneur pour l'énergie qu'il lui donne. Vous avez les salutations de Dr. Karl. Il voulait intervenir pour nous saluer, mais je ne l'ai pas vu connecter demain. Et nous bénissons aussi le Seigneur pour son œuvre dans la vie de notre ETL, qui ne se porte pas bien, mais je l'ai vu vraiment connecté tout à l'heure. Continuons à prier pour lui. Et pour tous les autres bien-aimés qui ne se portent pas bien. Donc, une fois de plus, shalom, continuons à lire et à faire les devoirs. Demain, c'est la dernière journée. On va donner les précisions de quand on va remettre le devoir final de 12 pages là. J'espère que tout le monde a déjà remis les 2 pas de réflexion sur le livre Le Roi, le Sage et le Bouffon. Si vous ne l'avez pas fait, pensez-y d'ici peut-être demain, avant la clôture. Donc, que Dieu vous bénisse. Et demain, nous allons demander à Madame Fitian Justine, à 14h moins 20, de nous conduire dans un temps de prière. Justine est là?
Elle est là, sujet de prière.
Donc, nous allons demander à Maman Cathy. Maman Cathy, qui est de prier pour clôturer cette journée. Remercier Dieu pour le formateur. Pensez à notre ETL, que Dieu le fortifie. Nous le prenons comme point de contact pour tous nos bien-aimés qui ne se portent pas bien.
Ok.
Tu as la parole, Maman.
Ok, prions. Seigneur, nous voulons te dire merci et te rendre toute la gloire parce que tu es celui qui ouvre notre intelligence et qui l'éclaircit. Tu es aussi celui qui continue à nous équiper, notre Dieu, afin, Seigneur, que nous puissions être aptes pour ton œuvre. Nous te disons merci pour Dr. Chris, pour son sacrifice malgré le décalage horaire, pour aussi ce petit temps que tu lui donnes afin de dispenser toutes ces choses qui sont assez importantes pour notre vie personnelle, mais aussi pour notre ministère. Nous te disons merci pour toutes les personnes qui ont œuvré, travaillé pour que ce cours se passe dans les bonnes conditions. Nous te disons merci pour la technologie et nous te disons merci pour chacun de nous, pour la santé que tu renouvelles, pour la patience. Seigneur, nous voulons particulièrement te confier tous ceux qui ne se sentent pas bien dans leur corps, d'une manière ou d'une autre, en commençant par notre Étienne et d'autres personnes qui sont là, mais qui ne sont pas bien dans leur corps. Nous voulons qu'en ce moment, notre Dieu, tu touches leur corps, que tu leur communiques, Seigneur, la guérison au travers les meurtrissures de Jésus. Merci, notre Seigneur, de restaurer chacun de nous physiquement, spirituellement, intellectuellement aussi, notre Dieu, pour que nous puissions continuer ce travail demain et dans les jours à venir. Seigneur, nous continuons à te confier aussi nos familles, que tu les bénisses, que tu prennes soin et que tu nous donnes la paix pour que nous puissions terminer en paix. Toi qui as commencé avec nous et qui as terminé avec nous ce moment, nous te disons merci en te confiant le temps de demain pour que tu en sois celui qui le dirige et qui le contrôle. Nous te rendons toute la gloire au nom de Jésus. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Excellent soir à vous tous.
Amen.
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 Thank you and goodbye.
On va prendre la photo de la formation.
Quand? When? Now? Is it now?
Demain. Tomorrow. Demain.
Demain.
Ok, merci.
Merci.